So as we wrap up our discussion and thinking about race and racial awareness, um, I thought about, what kind of progress we've made as a society, and some of you have noted over the past few weeks, we have made good progress as a society, but there's still definitely some work and improvements to be done. And so thinking about like what's the kind of the progress marker, oftentimes you'll hear someone say that they might be colorblind with respect to race. And so I wonder, what do you think they mean, or what do you think that means if someone says, I am or I hope to be colorblind with respect to race?
I don't see any difference in the nationality here and the one here.
Yeah, no difference, yeah.
Pretty much the same thing. If you really are a good person and this other person is a good person, you're not gonna have any problems anyway.
Yeah, whatever their race or ethnicity is.
It
Yeah.
doesn't, the color of their skin does not change
Yeah.
what comes from within.
Good, good. It shouldn't make a difference. Sometimes it does, but it shouldn't.
Well, we all have our problems from time to time.
True, true. That is very, very true. Very true. Well, in thinking about that, that idea of kind of being colorblind in respect to race, which is something that, I've thought about myself, trying to be that, perhaps. I wondered if that idea would also describe God's view or understanding of all the races in humanity. Do you think God would in some way be colorblind as well?
I don't think he would think of color at all. God created everybody, but it's that soul that he recognizes. Well, I think God created all of us, but I think he knew he was creating different,
Ethnicities.
that word. But I don't think he saw a difference and probably hoped that we as humankind would not see a difference, but we have in the past. So, but I mean, he created them, so they're part of his children.
And to quote the children's song that all of us have heard,
Black and white.
red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. That's how the song goes. It was interesting to think about that, because I never really thought about that before. Like, would God be colorblind? And in some ways, yes, for the reasons that we've said, is that, God loves all people, and God, sees us for who we are on the inside, and it's our soul, it's on the inside what truly matters. And then I'm reminded of that passage in Revelation 7 that has been kind of our vision, our goal, because it's literally the kingdom of heaven is what John in Revelation is seeing. And in that vision, it does specify that, at least John in that book, could see people from every language and every nation and every race praising God and standing around the throne and praising God as a chorus together. So it was kind of interesting to hold both of those kind of truths at the same time and say that God knows and loves all of us, and that includes whatever our physical makeup is. If we have freckles, God acknowledges and loves our freckles. I'm talking about myself. If we need glasses, God acknowledges and loves our eyesight. Whatever kind of height we are, whatever kind of differences we are. In some respect, God knows and recognizes and loves all of our differences. And in that vision of heaven, what makes it so beautiful, it could have been that John said, and then I looked and there was a great multitude, more than anyone could count. Everybody looked the same. And they were praising God, and it was great. But instead, in John's vision of heaven, he said, no, it's every language, every nationality, every culture, which is not necessarily colorblind. It's almost, I don't know, color redemptive or color celebratory in a way to kind of recognize it and celebrate those differences. And I remembered what one of the ministers from the documentary said in the first half that we watched 2 weeks ago. She said, there's nothing wrong with recognizing that we're different. You know, you're different from me, I'm different from you, different, heights or hairs or glasses or whatever it is. She said, but racism is an awareness of race that has gone sour. She didn't really explain it that much, but it felt like a powerful truth. So how would you explain the way she put it there?
I think we certainly aren't colorblind. Because we are given eyes with which to see color. So I think if we say we're colorblind, we are being untruthful. I can see we all look different, but that those differences we are to celebrate, that it's okay inside and out that we are different, and that is what makes us all unique and beautiful, and we are to rejoice in those things. But when we say, okay, I am fat and that is bad and we are hateful toward me or treat me differently, that is the same as racism. If you are treating someone differently because of what they are on the outside and you're looking down on that person and treating them badly because of that, that's the sourness.
Yeah. It would be like saying, I recognize that some of us have glasses and some of us don't. And that's okay. It's okay to recognize that. But once I start saying, well, people with glasses are smarter, obviously. We can see better than clearly, yes.
The vision is great.
Our vision is wider. Well, once it goes from recognizing differences to being soured towards judgment and exclusion and arrogance, that's when it sours. That's when whether racism or classism or all the kind of prejudicial isms. And it's okay. I think that for me, I'll speak for me, sometimes you might, you're trying to tell a story or describe something and you don't want to be offensive because we're all nice people and we kind of like, should we note that there is a person of a different skin color, or we might try and pretend like we don't notice or pretend that people don't have different skin colors, and that it's an odd kind of awkwardness that I will have, kind of, oh, I want to be polite here or something. And out of that awkward sense of respect, trying to deny that there are differences, which isn't as helpful as recognizing the differences and then celebrating them. Yeah, look.
We had one person that worked with us who was black. He fit in very well. And one day, there were a bunch of people standing around talking, and somebody said something that people blushed. And Tony said, well, I would blush if I could. So it took everybody by surprise, but.
That's funny.
But, we
Yeah.
accepted that.
Yeah.
His blushing didn't show up.
Yeah. I like that. It reminds me, in the end of the documentary, they said, here are 5 steps forward. One of them was be honest, and be honest with others in respect and in grace, and be able to speak honestly and be willing to be corrected. Because if we all just kind of try and not recognize anything and kind of keep everything censored, then it's not real connection and it's not a true celebration of differences. So we have to kind of take that honesty, encouragement, and be our true selves. And if we say something, and if it's received as rude or disrespectful, then hopefully the other person can be honest too and say, yeah, you really shouldn't say that like that. And we can go, okay, well now I know. Because that's how we learn, that's how we get better, is being honest and being true, and then learning, and the other person, all the other people being honest with us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like I met this colored lady over one day at Ingalls, and I said, we'd like to have you at First Baptist Church, Weaverville, and she said, no ma'am, says, I went to this white church, says, and they threw me out. I said, well, we wouldn't do that. I said, we would welcome you with all our arms and heart and everything. I said, we wouldn't throw you out. I said, we'd take you as long as our sister and love you. And I said, if you've got any kids, I said, we take them as our angels. And she said, ma'am, says, I appreciate that, but says, I want to stay away from white churches. And I said, okay.
And we can understand if she was harmed or insulted,
Yeah.
and just, traumatized and had a terrible experience in the past. She would say, life's too short to put up with that anymore. Yeah, I get it. But I'm glad that you extended a welcome to her on behalf of our church, that anyone of all races would be absolutely welcome. Yeah. Well, if racism is an awareness of race that's gone sour, and thinking about that, what that minister might have meant, gone sour, we've kind of talked around this question, but I want to ask this question kind of straight out. Do you think racism is a sin?
Yes.
I hear a yes. I see some nods. Yeah.
And I think that, I'm glad that we're talking about it as a church, because I think that, racism lives in our society still, and that, if Christians aren't going to face it and talk about it and ask questions about what can we do differently, what can we expect differently in our Christian communities, writ large or writ small, that, we're not doing the work that I think God would have us do, not just in ourselves, but in the greater world.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. I think it's fair to speak for all of you to say, that I and we have always just, known that it's wrong to be racist. But kind of thinking about it in spiritual terms, is it a sin? Is racism a sin? And if we think it is, then how should we respond that it's out there? Yeah, Gina.
I really just thinking about sin and active sin being, active racism being a sin. I remembered, I think it's the liturgy that we use for Ash Wednesday, or maybe it's for something else, but one of the ones that we lead every year, it says, forgive us, God, for the things that we have done and for the things that we have left undone. So both actively doing things that cause harm to people, but also the sin of not working against racism, even if we may not actively be participating. Just because we may not have done such and such thing, are we, as a community of privileged people, working in anti-racist work?
Yeah, it reminds me of another prayer liturgy that I've heard that says, oh God, forgive me of the sins of commission that I committed, and forgive me of the sins of omission, where I have not done something, and thereby in not doing the thing I should do, forgive me, oh God. And if we know that there is sin out there in some way, and it might be a temptation to not do anything about it or not say anything about it, then do we also need to say, God, forgive me my sins of omission as well, things that I've left undone. Yeah. And we will, yeah, Bill.
if we were to ask, what is your definition of racism? I bet we would have half a dozen at least different definitions. So, yeah, to answer your question, yes, some acts of racism are sinful. But, racism's been around ever since the Samaritans back in biblical time. And I think it'll be with us till the Lord comes home,
Yes,
to some degree or another.
and evil will always be with us, indeed.
So, it's up to us as Christians to show love. And if we're not doing that, then that's where my line is.
Yeah, and that's a great reminder when we think about, what should I do, what can I do? And it's easy to kind of be overwhelmed at this big problem. You can always start and go back to, it's our job to show love. And just start from there. Don't try and have, step one, change everything, because it's going to be too overwhelming. You'll never feel like you're making progress. Step one, you always act in love. And then let the Holy Spirit guide you to what step two is, as you learn, as you hear, as you kind of realize what might be going on, then let that guide you. Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard for me to look at it as racism. Sometimes I look at it as it doesn't matter what color they are. It matters to me what they're doing, and I'm prejudiced against that. And that's hard for me because we all need to get to know whomever we're thinking we're prejudiced against and find out what that person's quality is and what their makeup is, instead of just assuming, I wouldn't be called dead with him.
Mm-hmm.
It is, you have to get to know someone. And if you get to know someone and decide that you would be better off if you're not a friend of that person, I don't think that's racism, but people might say, well, she's racist because she wouldn't be a friend to Jose, or whomever. But that's not the reason. The reason is I shouldn't be associated with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Do
Yeah.
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think you're raising a couple of good points. The first thing, it reminds me of a few weeks ago, someone, pointed out that racism is kind of the easy target because it is so visually obvious, and we do have such an obvious, terrible history with it. But there's a deeper issue of just prejudice and judgment and arrogance and exclusion. And, our country in the South happened to use race as the biggest obvious example, but there are more. It could be someone of the same race who might talk differently than you, or wear a t-shirt that says something that rubs you the wrong way, or might live or act in a certain way, and you're ready to judge them before you know, like you said, their story, where they came from, their, what their character might be.
I feel like that people are more judgmental than they are racist.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I'm gonna have to think about that. Yeah, Brad, were you raising?
Yeah, I was gonna say that Brenda's example raised a good example that it's difficult for us, it's difficult for me to put myself in that person's shoes and because we haven't lived their experience. We haven't gone into that white church and faced whatever that woman faced.
Right.
That has obviously affected her for a long time and affects the way she views the world. And so it's really difficult to put yourself in those shoes and to understand, and comments have been made, we need to understand those people, get to know those people. And, it doesn't matter skin color or, you know, it's difficult to not be judgmental, about anything. I'm involved.
Yeah, yeah, and we've talked about that over the last few weeks, that as humans, we naturally put up walls of separation against people who are different from us. Race, yes, but also, you know, background, attitude, lifestyle, whatever it is. Even though in Ephesians it says that Christ's work is to break down those barriers, but our natural kind of human instinct is to raise them and to exclude and to separate those that are different. And again, race is really sadly too easy to do that separation. Yes.
Something about logistics here that we don't want to look at sometimes, but if somebody standing between you and your God, nobody got to think about that. Wait a minute, that means they're closer to God than I am. You think about that before you condemn somebody for, or thinking somebody's getting closer, or somebody standing between you and your God.
It's always good to listen first and to get to know those who are different that we might not understand. And then if we learn that, yeah, maybe we're not gonna be best buddies in the future, that's okay. There's a lot of white people I don't wanna be friends with, you know what I mean? Well, that's okay, that's fine. But to get to know them first, that's what's important. As we think about that idea of racism as sin, or where it might be, or when it might be expressed, and I've said this over the past few weeks, and right now, how proud I am of our church for its spirit and for its welcome. I think we're doing well, and I'm sure there's ways that we can do better, because none of us individually or together have, you know, perfected ourselves. Fortunately, I don't think any of us in here were ever so obviously racist that we were in the KKK, and none of us turned fire hoses or dogs on civil rights marchers or anything like that. But like we've kind of said already tonight, the ministers in the documentary said that now racism is more subtle than it used to be, like back in the 60s in the big civil rights march era. That now it's more, they use the word sophisticated, so it's not as obvious. And even if we individually are, you know, trying really hard to not be racist, or to not ever be racist, or if we have, you know, assumptive, prejudicial thoughts, that we acknowledge and confess those. So even if we are trying our best to do good, other people will be racist, and institutions and systems can be racist for us. So we really do need to pay attention and know what's going on. Like if any of the things that we are a part of, any larger systems, if our taxes are being used in ways that might reinforce inequality, and no one has kind of realized it yet, then we can, you know, speak up about it. Or if our representatives in government are taking actions or saying things that might prevent more equality, then that's one way that we can, you know, show love and not commit those sins of omission. Just to kind of be aware and to listen and to be ready to be that presence of love, and whatever we can do to help bring about that vision of heaven in Revelation 7, to speak the truth in love, we need to do that. So before I'm going to break us up into groups, and before we do that, I want to reiterate what I said, I think last week, how proud I am of you all for coming to a Bible study series that's not happy, happy, joy, joy. That's not, you know, oh, everything's great, yay, everything's gonna be fine. You know, if you pray it, then you'll get whatever you want. Name it and claim it, baby. You know, that would be a lot more popular kind of topical series. But y'all have been coming, and I appreciate that, because it's it's not the most comfortable of topics. But just because something is uncomfortable, if it's true, then we need to know it, and we need to recognize it, and we want to face it so that we can do something about it, so that we can help build the kingdom of heaven a little more. Denial of the truth is never helpful, but putting in more love always will be. Okay, let's divide up into groups. Brian, can you give one of these sheets to every person? I'm going to divide you up. I think all the folks who are sitting in these chairs right over here, if you can turn and be one group. Everybody at that table right there, you can be one group. Regina, why don't you come right over here with these chairs, and you can be one group. So in your handout tonight, here's what I did. In that documentary that we watched, they mentioned an instance in the 60s when the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville invited Martin Luther King to speak, and how bad of a fallout it was afterwards. And I don't know if you noticed, but when they were talking about how so many Baptist churches in the South were upset, they showed some letters, some complaint letters on the screen. I was curious, and so I paused for each of those 3 letters, and I typed out what each of those letters from 3 different churches had said. So I'll read the intro part. In April 1961, Martin Luther King Jr. was invited to speak at the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. His lecture, "The Church on the Frontier of Racial Tension," challenged the listeners to end segregation by teaching the equality of all races and the destructive nature of segregation. Many churches began withholding money from the seminary because of that. The following letters were sent to the Southern Baptist Convention's leadership board, the executive committee. So I want you to read the letters below and think about the questions that follow. And I'm going to start you at different ones, and if you finish yours, you are very free to read another one and talk about that one. This group over here to my left start with number 1. The table start with number 2, and this group start with number 3. I think they're all pretty equal in kind of length and substance. So read yours and ask the questions and see what the rest of the people in your group think. And if you do finish, then feel free to go on to another one. That number 3 letter, you couldn't see where it was from on the video when I paused it, so I wasn't able to note where it came from. It was just an unnamed church. That's why it says unnamed church. And if anyone's watching from home, I will make this handout available as a, you can download it as a printout.
So maybe we should read it aloud. Our church. Yeah, no, you said it just fine. That's exactly right. It's a fair question. So, what's the rest of it?
All right, well, let's share the good thoughts that you all have had about each of the specific letters that you read. All 3 were very similar in their kind of tone and what they were expressing. There's just some of the details, some of the wording and arguments were a little different. So I want to hear what your groups thought. We'll start at the end and go backwards. Group number 3 that had letter number 3. What was so unpleasant about having Martin Luther King speak at a seminary? I mean, doesn't everyone love and respect Martin Luther King? Not back then. Okay. Well, this church, and again, you couldn't see where the letter was from on the screen, but they said they were withholding their money, quote, until this situation is resolved. So what does that mean? What do you think it meant to them? How did they, I don't even know what that would look like. When they were saying until this situation is resolved, what might that have looked like to them? I was just curious.
Well, I said, kind of cavalierly, but I don't think their intention was that they wanted Martin Luther King dead. But this idea of what he was speaking about and what he was preaching, and I would say being prophetic about, was so unpopular that it did result in his death. And so I think they wanted him to be, there was a sense that he needed to be annihilated so that the message would die with him, because people were so unready, and I may say are still kind of unready for the ongoing work. which is why I'm so proud of us for at least talking about it.
Yeah.
Because racism is the legacy of segregation, and segregation was the legacy of slavery, and slavery was the legacy of greed, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder when they say until it's resolved, they mean no one ever speaks of this ever again. Everything's fine.
How can you have him be there?
Right,
You know,
right.
how can you
Yeah,
take it back?
until it's resolved. Maybe they wanted heads to roll. Maybe they
well,
wanted
that's what I
people
wondered.
fired.
I wondered if the president
Mhm.
survived.
He did.
Good.
He continued being the president for a number of years after that, maybe like 20 years after that. Yeah. All right, group number 2 that had letter number 2. What kind of criticism was this church worried about bringing? Why were they so worried about people criticizing them? And why weren't they worried about not doing bad things that would cause criticism?
Well, I think that they were so afraid that people would say, they let a black man speak at their church. And, I considered that it's not any more than leaving women out of their Southern Baptist convention is, you know, and we were talking about how they said, for allowing Martin Luther King to speak at our beloved, how prejudiced is that?
You're tainting our beloved white
This is
seminary.
our place,
Yeah, this is our special.
we can't have him here.
Yeah, now he's sullied it, and now such actions that bring criticism to the Southern Baptist Convention. So it's interesting if they're worried that, Martin Luther King is saying, hey, let's not be segregated, let's have racial equality. And I assume there was some sort of inner conviction, maybe? Like, why would they worry that people are going to criticize them? It just makes me wonder what kind of inner soul conviction they were having. Were they feeling any guilt about their behavior? They were trying to hide it, and kind of like this group said, they wanted it resolved by never speaking of this again. So it's almost like they kind of knew they needed to hide something, perhaps, I don't know.
Well, why wouldn't they work, to stop the cause of criticism instead of preventing people from criticizing them? None of us want to change,
Truth, that is absolutely true.
and they didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, when they prayed for the wisdom and counsel of God, and that you might be strengthened to do his will, what did they want his will to be? They wanted his will to be, out with Martin Luther King.
Yeah. That's some pretty dirty pool as far as like church language goes, with playing the God card that heavy. It said, we pray for the wisdom and counsel of God that you might be strengthened to do his will and never talk about racial equality ever again. That's kind of what was implied. Like, God, to them, we need to be strong and do God's will and not listen to civil rights leaders. Yeah.
And Grace, I looked up where Graceville, Florida is.
Oh, yeah.
It's just below the Georgia state line in
Oh.
Panhandle.
Oh, Panhandle, Florida.
Very poor part of the state.
Yeah.
They did, turpentine, harvesting and, that kind of area.
Interesting. I've been told that the Panhandle of Florida is more like kind of the deep south of Georgia, Alabama, than kind of the rest of Florida, which gets more tropical. So, yeah. Okay.
So, I think really it's about being uncomfortable. And so,
Mhm.
and so I think that we have to, as Christians, modern Christians, we have to guard against seeking our own comfort instead of up against doing the will of God.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever it is in our time, I think that's a challenge, because there are surely things that would cause us to be uncomfortable. And so Brad asked the question, kind of, almost kiddingly, but not, what would somebody speak about that would cause an uproar today? So, I mean, is it women?
It's whatever makes us
Is it,
uncomfortable.
gender identity? What is it for the modern church? Even one that we see ourselves as moderate and open-minded, what would it be that, got under our skin and made people send nasty letters to the preacher, for example?
Yeah, that doing God's will is hard. What's also hard is not assuming that God's will equals whatever you want to do and whatever you like. And that's what this church is saying, is, hey, we're praying that you would do God's will, which happens to be exactly what we want and what makes us comfortable. So that's also a tension that we need to be aware of. All right, lastly, group number one, what did you all think about, was this out of the bounds of what the seminary should teach its students? No? Okay. Well, this church was very upset because it was kind of out of bounds of what a seminary education should be about and religious issues.
Well, I would like to point out, as I look at all of them, number 3 is the only one that acknowledges that Martin Luther King is a reverend. They all just say the appearance of Martin Luther King, not the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, they're not just inviting a speaker, they're inviting a pastor. So it is, this person is coming to speak about the kingdom of God and how it impacts people, and to say that that's not religious, And then the third one, I know that we were the first one, but just looking at all 3 of them, the third one says, you just invited him because he's popular right now, because he's, this is a man that has committed his life and his studies to God's work. So to say that it's not a religious issue, this is not just some, popular celebrity. This is an ordained minister with education, seminary education, and leads a church, and they don't even recognize that he's a minister, so.
And the first church was very upset that a controversial figure was brought in. So to that question on the sheet, how could somebody be totally controversial back then, but now be supposedly completely accepted, not controversial at all, 60 years later, and it's not a big deal?
Martin Luther King was highly educated, plus he had studied under Gandhi. Gandhi was the one that came up with the idea of peaceful resistance, non-violence resistance. And these people, that then could not stand that, because that's like opposition to what had been happening, where people took control by force, or people changed things by force. Martin Luther King said, no, we can change things without violence.
And yet, he was considered a controversial figure for saying, no violence for me, only peace. Nevertheless,
Maybe Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, he was controversial.
Jesus was quite controversial, yeah. But now, no longer controversial. How can that happen? Cecil said, just different generations.
Yes.
Talking about the grandchildren of the people who said that.
Mm-hmm.
Who grew up in a completely different environment.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
We human beings are a work in progress.
Exactly.
We have, some have matured over the years, some have not. So, that could be the answer.
I think that is the answer. And I think, I think that's a great reminder to end on. That human beings are a work in progress from the very beginning, in the recent past, 60 years ago, and today, including us. And I said this a couple of times over the last few weeks, let us not become so arrogant to think that we've figured it all out and then judge others, whether in the past or now. who we feel have not. Humans, all of us, are works in progress, and the only way for any human as an individual or as a group to make any good lasting progress is through love. That's the only way. You can't shame someone into being a better person. You can't guilt trip someone into being a better person. It is only love. And I know it's a lot slower than we would want that progress to happen. Nevertheless, the only way for any of us to grow and improve is through love. So let us be about that love, whether it's issues of race or wherever anyone is being oppressed or there's ever any inequality, whether it's obvious or sophisticated and we have to read between the lines. Let us always be those agents of love that step into those lines, into those cracks, and help lift up those who have been kept down. A great reminder to end on, so take the handout with you. On the back of the handout, you'll see the concluding paragraphs from Martin Luther King's speech that day at Southern Seminary, and you can see all the controversial, terrible, inflammatory things that he says about equality, and see what you think. And if you missed the other previous handouts, then they're right on the table. So I'll end with something I said by accident a few weeks ago, but I think there's truth to it. I said, go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and love your neighbor as yourselves, for goodness sakes, because we have a lot of making up to do. Indeed, let us do that. So.